Well, good afternoon. I want to welcome you all here. I'm Gary Green. I'm the president for SciTechnical Community College, and on behalf of our board of trustees, our faculty, our staff, especially our students, I want to welcome each and every one of you here today, particularly to those in the room and those who are not in the room, who are joining us from Ivy Tech in Indiana, and Oka Ramsey Community College, and in Minneapolis, St. Paul area, I guess, and also our guests from San Diego. So we're great to have connections to all of our partners in medical device education across the United States, and we've been pleased to be partners with a number of outstanding institutions over the last several years in providing leadership for the medical device education and training area. It's my pleasure today to not only welcome you, but to introduce one of our strongest partners in this area. Scott Sewell is the Vice President of Technology Acquisition and Development at Cook Medical. Has been an important part of this community, an important part of the SciTech community for a number of years. Former member of our SciTech Foundation Board, and Scott and I have worked together closely with Chamber of Commerce and other important community organizations as well. And we're really pleased to have Scott here to introduce our speaker today. Scott, thank you for your partnership, and thank you for being with us today.
Well, thank you, Dr. Green, and thank you, Russ Reed, for your invitation. So I'm here to introduce two of my coworkers. The first is Barry Slowery, and Barry is the president of Cook Medical's Endoscopy Division. So our division right here, Endoscopy, we have 650 employees, and we just do devices that go through flexible endoscopes in the GI tract. Barry joined Cook in 1996 as a European marketing manager, based in Ireland. So the great thing about Barry now is that our new president from Ireland, by unanimous vote, beer taps in the cafeteria after 5 o'clock, Guinness. So let's give it, come on, Barry, that was great. Only kidding. Of course, nothing else. Prior to joining Cook, Barry worked with Philips Electronics in Vienna, Austria, in the consumer electronics and software fields. He completed his studies in both Ireland and France, specializing in business, marketing, and French. And one of the great things about Barry is that before his role as president, Barry was in charge of global sales and marketing. So dealing with people from all over the world, and you walk by Barry's office and you hear these different languages come out of his office because he's fluent in numerous languages, so that's great. Barry is actively involved in Winston Salem Chamber of Commerce initiative. As a corporate volunteer at the local elementary school, we, as a company, team up with Old Town School, and we do some tutoring with their kindergartners and first graders. Barry and his wife Ann have 2 children. He enjoys running, hiking, travel, skiing, and reading. So that's Barry Slowery. Next is Vihar Surti, and Vihar is our Director of Research and Development for Cook Medicals for our division. He also does work for other divisions within Cook, working in the structural heart area. Vihar joined Cook as a product development engineer in 2000, was appointed director in 2013. He is published in 7 peer-reviewed journals. Vihar is a smart guy here. Holds 47 patents. Well, you're the smartest, of course, because you're president. Okay. He holds 47 patents, and there's several other patent pending. So it's, I work a lot with the engineering group, and it's always a pleasure to work with engineering because they really are smart people. And in our company, their goal is to develop devices to help patient care. So it's really exciting. Vihar earned a bachelor's degree in biomedical engineering at NC State University and in 1996, and a master's degree in mechanical engineering from NC State University in 2009. Vihar and his wife, Purvi, have 2 kids, 2 children. Vihar enjoys spending time with his family, reading, biking, coming up with new ideas for medical innovation. So I'm going to bring up Vihar and Barry.
Yeah. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Everybody hear us? Are the mics on? Yep. You can hear us okay? Okay. So just before we get started, I thought post-election, I'm not going to talk politics, but I thought that's how most of us feel about how the country looks right at this moment. But one of the topics that came up a lot in the election is healthcare, and there's been a lot of discussion. We've been through a lot of changes in healthcare in the last few years. We're probably getting ready to go through a lot of changes in the next couple of years, so we think it's appropriate that we're here to talk on the topic of healthcare today. And firstly, maybe to talk to you a little bit about Cook Medical and who we are. You can see our headquarters is in Indiana, Bloomington, Indiana, home of IU. We have 15,000 products. Actually, I think I have a pointer here. With 15,000 products, we employ 12,000 people globally. About 50% of our sales are international, about 50% in the US, but we pride ourselves on having 70% of our manufacturing in the US. So although we export half of our products, we keep 70% of our manufacturing in the US. Reason we're able to do that is because we're a privately held company. In actual fact, we are the largest privately held company in the world, medical device company. We manufacture on 3 different continents. So we manufacture in Europe, in Ireland, where I started, and also in Denmark. And then in the Asia-Pacific region, we manufacture in Brisbane, Australia. And as a privately held company, we don't have to answer to shareholders, which has lots of advantages. The biggest of which we believe, and we'll show some examples during the presentation, is that we feel like we can have a long-term view, and we're able to do some products, one of which you'll see today, that don't make any financial sense, that we wouldn't be able to do as a public company, but that we can do because we're privately owned.
Yeah, from an engineering standpoint, that's very exciting because there are certain products that basically have a very small impact in terms of the number of patients, but we're able to select those projects and be able to do that. So that's exciting. One of the things I'd also add is that, just to reiterate a little bit of what Scott Sewell was saying, our Winston Salem facility is dedicated towards endoscopy. And what that is devices that go through a camera, that you go through the mouth or any other natural orifice. Colonoscopy is the most common procedure that most people know about. So we make devices,
and everybody loves.
Yeah, we make devices that are about 200 centimeters long that go through these small channels, about 3 millimeters, less than 3 millimeters, and so that's usually the type of products we're talking about. And we'll talk a little bit about a particular one.
Yeah, and we're also excited that we've been in Winston-Salem for 33 years, and we employ almost 650 people here locally, and we do our own manufacturing, research and development, regulatory, finance, everything here locally in Winston-Salem. So that's something that we're
Very
particularly proud of.
Yeah. So this is one of our products to kind of give you an idea of what we do. This is HemoSpray. It is not available in the US, and we'll talk a little bit about why. But right now it is being sold for the last 5 years in Europe, Canada, and some other parts of the world. Basically, the product, as the animation is showing you, you activate the bottom handle, you open the valve, and you're spraying this powder material through this catheter. And the catheter, again, like I said, was about 200 centimeters long. For the application of if you're bleeding in the stomach or in the colon, without having to do any surgery, you can put the endoscope through the mouth, put the device through the endoscope, and stop a bleed. This shows a little bit of the animation of how this material works. This material comes from being used in the battlefield, a version of it, and they were using it for blast wounds and bleeding associated with that. So
Both
what you
in
see,
Afghanistan and Iraq it
yeah,
was used.
and what you see here is sort of the super absorbent aspect of this material, and it swells and it creates sort of this mechanical band-aid, so to speak, in the GI tract. So as this sort of sticks to the tissue, you get this tamponade effect on the bleeding, and it stops it. And again, without any direct access to the bleeding site, you're doing this at about 200 centimeters away. So that's the impact of the kind of device we have.
Yeah, and we wanted to show an example of a device that we manufacture, one that we've developed recently, so that when we go through the rest of the presentation, we'll be referring back to that device. There'll be a quiz at the end, okay?
Yeah.
Is everybody listening at the back? Yeah. So
we just want to give you an example of a device, so as we go along and we talk about all of the challenges and the hurdles involved in bringing a device to market, we'll keep referring back to this device, the HemoSpray. So one of the things, why is medical devices such a growth area in the US and around the world? It's mainly because of trends that we're seeing globally in healthcare. As you can see, in the US, we spend about 18% of our gross national product on healthcare. Europe, and this is probably a different discussion by itself, Europe spends about 8 to 10% of GNP on healthcare. So as we've heard in recent years, and it's not just in US elections, it's in all elections around the world, healthcare is a huge challenge. At this stage in the US, we're spending about $1 out of every 5 on healthcare. And the reasons for this is obviously, there are a multitude of reasons, but obviously technology is advancing rapidly. If you look in the last century, healthcare technology has probably been responsible for about a 30-year extension in life expectancy. So it's a good thing. It's really, the technology has advanced, so have our expectations. And so people's expectations of what is available has increased enormously. Populations in the Western worlds, particularly in Southern Europe, places like Japan, the population aging is further along, but those aging populations are putting a greater strain on healthcare. Also, what we're seeing in emerging markets like the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, and China, there's a new middle class that's developing, and they have an expectation of healthcare as well. So for us, as a company here in Winston-Salem, our number 2 market is China. So our largest single market is the US, but our number 2 market after the US is actually China. So those are some of the trends that are driving the need for more healthcare and the pressure that that's putting on the whole healthcare system. And it's a major topic in all elections, in all countries around the world, whether it's in emerging countries or whether they're developed markets.
So our industry is pretty regulated, and there are lots of sort of regulations, rules that we have to follow. And what the FDA asks us to do is follow certain standards and certain requirements as we develop medical devices. So even the development process of a medical device is regulated. They expect us to follow a certain format in how you come up with a device. And that is what we call design controls. And so there are phases in design controls, like coming up with the design inputs, or coming up with the design outputs, or coming up with doing design validation, verification. And all of those have meaning and some requirements associated with that. And being in a regulated industry, these are the important things that we have to follow that right process. Engineers love to build things, and if you give them the choice, they will build stuff and they will document nothing. So what this really does is make sure it makes us document a lot of our thought process as we're developing this, so we can refer back to it and others can audit to that. Risk management is also another example. It comes from a standard that we're sort of asked to follow. It is the idea that you're not only looking at the risk of the device, but as you're launching the device and after it's been in the market, you're following through and understanding whether the risks of that device continually are being monitored. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Standards, there are very specific standards even during the development process that we use. Biocompatibility is a big standard in the medical device field, and depending on if you're contact with just mucosa or you're contacting with blood, there's different requirements associated with that. If your duration is 24 hours or your duration is more than 30 days, there are different requirements. So we have a lot of standards that we have to follow. There are device-specific standards, there's sterilization standards, but these are all the things that we have to educate ourselves and navigate through. And it's important as a company to understand all of these requirements before you can launch a new device. So, the other aspect of this is the quality system audit. So, in device, as we launch these devices, the regulators come back and sort of monitor your quality system. So, in our case, the FDA comes every 3 years and looks at our facilities and looks at our quality systems and ensures that we are following the procedures that we set out for that. So it's not just that you launch a product, but there's a lot of monitoring of our systems that these regulatory folks are looking for. And it's not just the FDA, it's even external. China, Brazil, all these countries as well have regulatory bodies that look for it, and making sure that we're doing the right things with our procedures. So, you want to add something?
Yeah, and I mean, in the case of Europe, we get audited once a year. So for the CE mark, we have auditors that come in once a year and audit our system. And there are different ways that different countries around the world audit, and there's different ways that they regulate. Surprisingly, in some ways, the US is a very government-driven regulatory system. It's the FDA that audits. In Europe, it's actually third parties that audit on behalf of the departments of health of each country. So there are different ways, but basically all of them are still looking for the same types of information.
Yeah.
I'll speak to this one a little bit. So this is just very broad strokes, but if you look at it, there's different levels of difficulty in getting a device approved for human use around the world. On the what we would call the easier side, once you meet the basic requirements of the development of a medical device, the markets that are easiest to get into are markets, and these are just two examples, such as Chile in South America and Hong Kong. And you might say, well, why are those markets easy to get into, and why do those governments make that decision? I suppose those governments make the decision that they want to have a lot of competition. They want to have access to technology earlier than other countries. And Malaysia, Singapore, some of those markets are very similar. The flip side of it is some of the other markets would look at that and they would look at the risk benefit and say, we want a higher level of scrutiny. Yes, we want competition. Yes, we want to drive down prices. We want to have access to technology early, but we want to have the right balance between risk reward. So if you look in the middle, in this broad spectrum, you will see that Europe and the US, we would say they fall sort of in the middle in terms of their level of difficulty in getting a device approved in those markets. Europe, generally, for particularly the lower to medium risk devices, easier than the US. And then the countries, some of the countries, you have countries in Asia on both sides, but some of the countries in Asia, in particular China, Japan, and Korea, would be the most difficult. And part of the reason they're the most difficult, part of it is that we're a US-based company, and our understanding of the regulations in the US are obviously, we're very clear. And even in Europe, we've been operating in Europe for a long time. We understand those regulatory expectations very well, and there's a CE mark that covers all European countries, so we only really have to look at one primary system for all of Europe. Asia is not that way. Each individual country in Asia has its own regulatory system, its own regulatory requirements. So part of it is that you need to understand, you need to be able to understand the language, obviously. You need to be able to understand not just the written rules, but how they're interpreted, because all of these regulations in all countries are, when you read the regulations, are really short. It's the interpretation of the regulations that counts. So we have a lot of expertise in Cook, and a lot of other companies have to develop a lot of expertise to understand the specific requirements of these markets. And some of them have different engineering expectations as well, Vihar.
Exactly. If you take hemospray specifically, it started in Hong Kong. We're in Europe. We haven't yet made it to the US, and haven't made it to those countries there. And primarily, the difference in Europe and US, they both areas look at safety. But one area looks at, do you meet your intended use, versus US has an expectation of improved effectiveness. And so you have to show that you meet some effectiveness bar that they set. And that's part of the reason that those two are very separated.
Europe looks primarily at safety, and the US is looking at safety and effectiveness.
Yeah.
And then, like if you take our example of the hemospray, Canada is probably similar to Europe in general, but in the case of the hemospray, actually, it was after doing our initial clinical study with 30 patients in Hong Kong, Canada was, I think, the first country that we received regulatory approval for that device in, which is probably 5 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago now, and we still haven't got US approval at this stage, as an example.
Mm-hmm. So the other way to look at how long it takes a device to get in is look at the sort of the classification of the device. And device classifications are based on risk. Basically, globally, most people sort of classify into 3 or 4 categories, with Class 1, Class 2, and Class 3 devices being the different risk categories. But Class 1 devices are stuff that like Band-Aids, and they're not that regulated. Our endoscopy devices primarily fall in the Class 2 category. And vascular devices are things that usually fall into higher risk class 3 devices. So one of the other reasons why we've had a debate with the hemospray in getting into the US is that we felt pretty strongly that hemospray was a class 2 device, but the FDA felt pretty strongly that there was a class 3 device, and even at one point they thought it was a drug. So it took a long time to sort of talk through that and have them come to the understanding, and that now they do agree that it is a class 2 device. But again, we're still going through the motions of finishing that effort. But I think that's where a lot of the debate happens with some of these regulatory. The other part of it is the kind of device you have. If you have an iterative device, and we'll talk a little bit about that, the challenges are less. You have less unknowns that you have to prove. On the flip side of that, if you go into discovery type of devices, very novel devices, there's so many unknowns, there's so many things you have to prove, and that requires a longer length of time in order to get these products into the market. So,
yeah, and when we're looking at our strategy as a company, we probably, Cook overall, we would have a mix of all of these devices. Specifically in the endoscopy division, it's mainly in these class 2 devices. But if we look at the half of our business, more than half of our Cook's overall business, which is vascular, there's also quite a few devices which are class 3. So when we're looking at our strategy and deciding what types of products do we need to work on, what type of products do we need to bring to market, we're looking at what is the sort of time frame associated with those devices. The quickest you will ever get a medical device to market is probably 1 to 2 years, and that rarely happens. We wish it happened more often, but the fastest you will get a device to market is 1 or 2 years, and that's probably an iteration. It's something you already have and you've added some features, and it's an iterative version of what you have already. The quickest you'll get that to market is 1 or 2 years. Most devices probably are in that 2 to 5 years, and whether they're iterative, probably those devices are iterative as well, but it's typically 2 to 5 years. And then you have some devices here, depending on the complexity of the device and the amount of research and development that you need to do, they might be out here in that 6 to 10 years. And we have examples in all 3 categories.
Yeah, we do. I mean, one of the examples that we'll have later on, and we'll show an animation and a video, is a humanitarian device, which is also a class 3 device. And again, we'll talk a little bit about that too.
So when we're looking at developing a new device, what are the things that we take into consideration? The very first of all, is there a need? I mean, is the product truly differentiated from what's out there on the market today? And does it make a clinical difference? Is it going to make a difference for the patients? And do the physicians think that it's novel enough that they're going to want to switch from what they're currently using to this new device? That's the very first thing. Is there a need? The second thing after that is what price is the market willing to take? So prices differ all around the world. Our prices for our devices in Europe and the US are about the same. But in other markets like Japan, the prices are higher because the challenges of getting into that market are higher. And then in some of the emerging markets like India or Africa, the prices are a lot lower. So right out of the gate, you need to have a good understanding for your devices, how much is the market willing to pay for this device. So supposing we say that the market's willing to pay, we have a novel product, there is a need, the physicians believe there's a need for the product, and we think that the average selling price or the ASP for that device is about $200. We probably need the materials and labor for that device to be about $50. So not all of the cost in developing it, or the manufacturing, or the overheads, or the regulatory, but just the pure materials for the device and the direct labor that you put into that device probably would need to be about $50. So if you're looking at a device where the market price globally that will bear is about $200, you need to be able to ask yourself early in the process, is this something we can make from a pure variable cost, materials and labor, for about $50? And if you can't, you don't really want to be spending 1, 2, 3 years in that development process. Get to the end and figure out you have a great device, but the market's not willing to bear that, accept that type of cost.
Barry has never asked me to design a device at $50. It's usually like $10 or $20, just FYI.
You got to start low, and then engineers always drive it up.
That's not a realistic number, no. But yeah, no. So I think we're all being a global company. The other thing is we're all looking at design for the cost in terms of trying to sell in China rather than selling in Europe. So you have to go based on where you want to go, and you have to look at the cost not relative to where you want the product to go. So
I think
some of
that's a good point.
yeah.
So if we historically look at it, we would have been very focused on the US and Europe
Yeah.
as our primary markets. Now we would think a lot about Asia. Asia would be very high on our list of, okay, we're developing a new device. We typically have a lot of competitors coming out of Asia, in particular coming out of China. We've quite a few coming out of Korea. So we want to see, if we're bringing a device to market, is it going to be cost competitive in those markets? And there are factors that feed into that, like volume is a big one. Is it a device that's a relatively low volume device, or is it a high volume device that gives us opportunities to design and manufacture in a different way? And some of the factors that feed in there, obviously, we spend an awful lot more time now in the early phases of the device thinking about not just developing a design that meets the need, but we think a lot about the manufacturability. Do you want to talk about that aspect of it,
Yeah,
Vihar?
no, I mean, we can. I think, again, from a manufacturability, when you're looking at cost, there's different decisions you make depending on whether this is a very high volume product and where it is launched versus a very low volume product. And if you're selling 200 a week compared to 2,000 a week, you're going to make a lot of different decisions in terms of manufacturing. We'll talk a little bit about that too. I will say that labor isn't usually the most costly item. Usually what we end up with is a lot of materials and R&D costs being the more costly item. So that's why one of our, in Cook, we're very U.S. driven in terms of keeping our manufacturing sites in the U.S. So different versus disruptive. We've said this a few times, and I think everyone has different decisions, different definitions of iterative and disruptive. But I think this is probably a simple example of basically a medical device. But you have eyeglasses, you have contact lenses, and you have laser being the right image there. And to us, sort of a disruptive is going from that sequence from eyeglasses to contact lenses to laser. But having transition glasses, having bifocals, and all those are the iterative types of things. And the reason we bring this up is medical device development is complex or simple depending on the kind of category that these types of devices are. And it does sort of create a different scale of what we have to do if you're going towards the right, whether you're going towards the sort of the bottom with new devices. And I think that one of the core issues of disruptive and iterative is that you have a lot of unknowns with disruptive devices. So they tend to require more clinical trials. They tend to have much more of a debate with regulatory bodies about what these devices are. Versus the iterative, you can basically reference what you have before. So that's why it's important to really delineate between some of these things. Again, people have different definitions of it, though.
And I think another factor that's important is the longer a company is in existence and the larger a company gets, the more they tend to move towards iterative devices and get away from disruptive because disruptive have a lot of risk associated with them. It's long time frames. The failure rate is much higher. But the danger is when you get into being an iterative type company and you're always iterating, somebody's going to disrupt. And when that person comes along and figures out contact lenses or LASIK surgery or whatever. In this example, it's unusual in that all three technologies still coexist side by side. But if we took, say, a company like Kodak that made cameras for years, they were very, very focused on iterating their cameras all along, and they weren't looking at the fact that the cameras were going from being analog to digital, and that the camera was inside your phone. So that was an example of a company that got completely left behind. So something we think about a lot, particularly being a company our size, is how do we keep a disruptive culture? That sounds bad, a disruptive culture, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
How do we make sure that in our thought process and in how we go about developing new devices that we have a balance between iterative devices that you need to have to keep the business that you have today and to keep ahead of your competition, but also making sure that you're really working on disruptive technologies. They're going to make such a big patient impact that the market's going to move to them either quickly or over time, and the old technologies are going to be left behind.
Yeah, in our hemospray example, there has been a variety of hemostatic devices out there. It started off with a needle injection with epinephrine being one option. Now they have a mechanical clip as a second option. They have They have a bipolar probe, which exerts energy and sort of burns the tissue as a third option, and hemospray being sort of the disruptive option after that. So we have continuously improved each one of those iterative hemostatic devices, but we also work on trying to create new categories of devices as well. So I think when you talk about disruption, where do ideas come from, right? There's lots of questions and a lot of people that ask, where do we get good ideas from? And like Barry was saying, large corporations do struggle with this concept, and we feel like it's part of our DNA. It's what we do well. But I think if you see in the market, what most companies are doing they're taking these teams that maybe from academia that create these founding, sort of have these founders, and they create small teams. They get the idea and they create startups. And a lot of these large corporations are going out there and acquiring that type of technology. That's not our model. Our model is to come up with ideas and create our own startups within the organization. But that is a model that is very common in medical device development right now. I think there's of course good and bad in every type of category, but startups it's a little bit hard to sort of look at the VC funding that comes through that, and if it dries out or whatever it is, that it is a challenge to get some of that funding associated with. So having to be able to do this, especially for me personally, to do this in a large corporation and doing this kind of work is very fulfilling and very rewarding from that perspective.
Yeah, and where Scott Sewell, who introduced us earlier, he works a lot with the universities around the world in getting ideas, in us collaborating with the universities at a very early stage. So we're not the public company that tends to buy the startups when they're $25 or $50 million. We're the company that tends to do that development work ourselves internally, working directly with universities or coming up with the ideas ourselves.
IP is a big measure in medical device development. I think when you spend 5 to 6 years developing a product, and if its lifespan is only about 5 years before others can get into the market, sort of the return of that investment is very limited. So one of the things we have to all look at from medical devices, how strong our portfolio of IP is associated with, so we can protect the space with not just for 5 years, but 10 years, 20 years for the amount of time and energy that we've spent in developing these things. So especially if you're taking clinical trials that takes millions of dollars to prove these data, we would like to make sure that some of these spaces are available to us for a while. So
that's half the story. That's making sure that when you come up with a new invention that's truly novel, that you can get protection of that device. The flip side of it is that if you come up with a new idea, you also need to get what's called a right to use. So what a right to use means is that you need to make sure that there's nobody else out there who already has patented your idea, whether they've developed the device or not. If they have a patent on that device and you bring that device to market, then they're going to sue you. So you either end up having to take your device off the market or licensing that patent from that company. So there's two sides to it. At the beginning of a project, engineering will probably do a preliminary look to see, okay, what are all the patents that I can find as an engineer in this particular area, and is there any obvious patents that could cause me problems if I go ahead with my design? Once I've finalized my design and I've built my first prototypes, I'm going to sit down with a specialized patent attorney that's specialized in medical devices and get them to do an extensive review of all of the patents that we have found, as well as the search that they will do. And depending on where you want to sell it in the world, you may have to do that search just in the US, or likely you have to do that search in multiple countries to see whether you're potentially infringing somebody else's patent. So the two sides to it is you at a minimum need to be able to get a right to use, so that you know that when you're selling your device that you're not infringing somebody else's patent. And ideally you want to come up with some concepts and some designs that are novel enough to allow you to get IP. The final thing you need to decide is, if you are going to get IP, do you just get the IP in the US, or do you look to get patents in different countries around the world? In our case, we usually get them in different countries around the world at a minimum: US, Canada, Germany, UK, Ireland, Australia, Japan, and in recent years, China. In the past, it was a waste of time having a Chinese patent because they were never enforced and nobody cared about them. But now that China's moved up the value chain a lot, they care a lot about IP. So now we would get Chinese patents, whereas in the past that was something we wouldn't have bothered with.
From a manufacturing standpoint, we touched on this a little bit, the type of manufacturing. I think a lot of the principles of good lean manufacturing come from the car industry, especially the Toyota lean manufacturing practices. And I think, you know, its adoption in medical device has been a little bit slow. And we are sort of trying to move towards that. The principles of lean manufacturing, you know, basically are reduce waste, and continuous improvement of your manufacturing processes. So as FDA and other regulatory bodies come in, they're looking at your manufacturing. They're seeing whether or not you're following good manufacturing practices within your facility. And so a lot of what we try to do is try to understand sort of some of these principles of lean manufacturing and try to adopt them within our manufacturing facilities, some of the things that we're driving towards and we're sort of challenging ourselves towards. But again, I think that your decision making is very dependent on what the forecast of these products are. So if you have a technology that is going to be forecasted to be really high volume, you're going to strive towards high automation. And if you have things that are low volume, you're going to strive towards more manual processes. And so those are the things that make a difference in terms of how you develop the device and how you develop the manufacturing of these products. Not all of our products are high volume. I would say that a lot of our products are in the sort of the medium, low volume range. We are not. We have some products that are in the very high volume range, but most of what Cook does is mostly in the medium to low volume side.
Yeah, and then one other factor that you need to consider is, are you going to manufacture it in-house? In Cook, we do a lot of in-house manufacturing. As I said, we have over 600 people here employed in Winston, and more than 300 of those are directly involved in manufacturing. And then typically the parts that we're outsourcing is obviously raw materials and components, and some sort of sub-assemblies is typically what we're looking at outsourcing. If you were a startup company, more than likely you're probably going to outsource the whole manufacturing of the product, and then there's a whole lot of considerations that would come into that as to why you would outsource or not and where.
Yeah.
Clinical studies. Clinical studies are important in the medical device arena. Do you need a clinical study to bring a product to market? You may do and you may not. So it goes back to that risk classification. If it's a class 3 device, you are going to need a clinical study. Some class 2 devices also need a clinical study. Clinical study is going to take a minimum of 3 years normally to complete, and you have to decide where in the world you want to do that clinical study. You also may do clinical studies. So the first reason you might do them is for regulatory reasons. In any particular market, the US or Japan or China, you may need a clinical study to get approval. Sometimes they will take patients from anywhere in the world. Sometimes they will want specifically patients from the country that you're trying to get regulatory approval from. So sometimes you have to do a multi-center, multinational study, so you have patients from lots of different countries. If it's not required for regulatory reasons, you may require it for customer adoption. So when we talked about our novel disruptive technology, if it's disruptive and totally novel, then chances are people are going to be skeptical about market acceptance of that device. So you may need some sort of a comparative clinical study or even a single-arm clinical study to show that the good outcomes for the device that you have. They're looking for evidence, objective evidence outside of your marketing and brochures and videos. They want to see objective evidence that it does what you say it does.
Yeah, from an engineering standpoint, as you go through the design control process, there may be some particular things that you can't simulate in-house. You know, at the end of the day, you do what you have to do in terms of verifying or testing your device, but there are some things you can't simulate internally. And so from an engineering standpoint, we may have to recognize that there are clinical trials that are just required in terms of being able to fully vet the device as we want it to be. And from a payer standpoint, a lot of these hospitals are asking for what is the value analysis of these type of products, and where does it make sense to use these products depending on the cost and the benefit associated with that. So,
and depending on the country, more and more the payers are looking for information. So for example, if you take the UK, they have a National Institute of Clinical Excellence, NICE. It's a nice acronym, but National Institute of Clinical Evidence, that looks at the clinical evidence and looks at the risk benefit and makes a decision whether they as a country are going to fund, they're going to pay for that device or not. So they're looking at what does the device cost or a drug, and what's the benefit, and is it worth spending their money on that. So the payers could be the government, or the payers could be private insurance companies.
So basically, this is highlighting sort of the process of a medical device, and the big part is the blue part right there, that once you launch the product, you have to monitor this device. You have to monitor how it's doing in the field. That's an expectation from a regulatory aspect, and an expectation that as complaints come in, they come back and you're looking at it, you're analyzing them, and you're feeding back into your processes to make sure that we're continuously improving our product, and understanding if there is any spikes in issues or any spikes in even its manufacturing process. So this is something that I think it's not usually well understood by folks, that launching is just one part of it. After that, you are living with that device, and you have to do a lot in terms of monitoring the device.
And there are very strict regulatory requirements. So the FDA has very strict requirements of what their expectations are, of how you handle complaints, which complaints you have to file with the FDA, how much time you have to file those. So if you have injury, serious injury, or death, there's a very specific way and there's a very specific time frame that you need to be able to follow up. So you have to be monitoring all the time, all around the world, how your devices are performing.
So just to bring this home and a little bit local, we've got the sort of the hotbeds of medical device has been traditionally the Boston area, the Minneapolis area, or the California area. I think that we've seen a dramatic increase in how North Carolina has been sort of gearing towards medical device development. I know I'm familiar with some of the work in wearable technology that NC State is doing with the ASSIST program. And then, of course, the Wake Forest Innovation Quarter, they have, of course, a drive towards medical device. So we're really excited about how things are going in North Carolina. And we've been here for about 30 years, and really starting to see a pretty big uptake in medical device development in this area. There are lots of good colleges that we sort of pull from. NC State graduates are sort of famous to be working for us. But we have a Virginia Tech, Wake Forest, Chapel Hill, Duke. These are great places for us to sort of get a lot of resources in terms of our support. So
yeah, and I think going forward, I mean, an awful lot of people come to North Carolina to study and then they go back somewhere else. So we have a great opportunity. There's great research being done within North Carolina. There's great opportunities to keep those people locally, develop good jobs locally, high tech, that will replace a lot of the old industry. So that's a huge opportunity for us. And we also have a lot of our employees that actually go to college in places like here, for SciTech. I know in your department you have somebody currently doing that. So the opportunities for existing employees to further develop themselves, from technicians into engineers, for example. And the other thing I would point out, that most of the jobs in the medical device industry are not engineering. There's a lot of opportunities in marketing, in product management, regulatory, finance, quality. So there's a lot of areas outside of engineering as well that are required in that cross-functional mix to be able to bring a medical device product to market.
Engineering is the only one that matters. Just
it's the only one that matters to Vihar.
Yeah. So this is the sort of the last device we wanted to sort of show, and we were talking about a humanitarian device. These are basically two magnets that the technology is based on two magnets, where you have a baby with an incomplete esophagus. They're born with what they call esophageal atresia. So they have sometimes from 1 millimeter to 5 centimeters of separation between the esophagus and the lower part of the stomach. So we come in with a device from the sort of the PEG side, and what that is, the percutaneous side, where they already have a sort of a hole right into
feeding tube into the stomach.
Yeah, feeding tube right into the stomach to feed them. So we come in with a magnet from the bottom, and we come in through a magnet from the top, from the mouth, and sort of mate the two magnets together. It takes about 7 days, and it creates a connection. And we have done about a couple of cases in the U.S. already, and one in Raleigh, so that we'll show a little bit video about. But the idea is that this pressure that we create brings these two tissues together. It creates a necrosis, and creates a really good anastomosis, which basically means that we join the two tissue together. And so this is one of those products that is very fulfilling in terms of, again, it doesn't happen that often. Thankfully, it doesn't happen that often. We may be selling maybe 5 or 6 devices a year, but for us, it's something very important that we feel like we have a great opportunity to do.
Yeah, and I'll show that animation again as we're speaking. But firstly, apologies for the animation. It's in an early stage. This is something that's a work in progress at the moment. And a shout out to a local company in Winston on 4th Street called Out of Our Minds that does all of our animation for us. They've been working with us for years, and they do a phenomenal job. The hemospray animation that you saw earlier came from that local company, Out of Our Minds. But this is just, we're going to see a video of a patient, little baby, after this, but we wanted to give you an idea of how this technology works. And what happens before this sort of simple idea of magnets was that the baby would have to be fed through a feeding tube for months until the baby's old enough to be able to undergo multiple surgeries. And they would have to do multiple surgeries to connect the stomach back up to the esophagus. And that would happen over a period of years. You're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars. We will probably sell this device for $250, $300, because it's something that the regulatory pathway that Vihar mentioned is a very special regulatory pathway that Cook created with we had the very first device in Cook with the FDA, and it's called a HDE, Humanitarian Device Exemption. So if you have a procedure where there's a disease where there's less than 4,000 cases a year in the US, you can use this Humanitarian Device Exemption regulatory pathway to get a device like this to market. So this is an example of such a device. And the video that we show next is the one we'll finish on before we go to Q&A.
A newborn girl became the first child in this country to have a rare birth defect corrected without surgery.
Annalise Depo was born without the ability to swallow, but after spending the first 8 weeks of her life at Wake Med, she's ready to go home this weekend. Brian Mims shows us how it all happened.
Here she comes now, attached to nothing but her mom and her pacifier. No more feeding tube through her belly. No, when Annalise is hungry, just give her the bottle.
Her prognosis is wonderful. I think she'll grow up just like any other normal kid, except she'll have a really interesting baby book.
Mom and Dad are Suzanne and Evan Depo. During pregnancy, they learned Annalise had something called esophageal atresia. That is, her esophagus had a gap about 1 inch long. The condition has always required surgery, but Dr. David Hoover of Wake Med told the couple about a procedure so new, Annalise would be the first baby in America to have it done.
Yes. I mean, I think any parent would say that it would be scary.
Then again,
So I felt like it was worth it to try it.
February 12th, Annalise was born. But for 2 months, her world would be the neonatal intensive care unit. Unable to swallow food, came through a tube.
We knew what had to happen. We knew she had to grow. So I would just come and cuddle with her and think about the upcoming procedure.
That procedure is not surgery. It involves inserting 2 magnets, one through her stomach and into the lower esophagus, one through her mouth into the upper, forcing the tube's ends to reconnect. Day 1, so far, so good.
By the next day, they were about right here. 6 hours later, they were all the way together.
For the next 5 days, the magnets stayed as the tissue from the tube's walls grew together. So far, so good.
She's been able to avoid a lot of the complications that a lot of these babies have had to have over the years because surgery was the only option.
When magnets came out and I could actually pick her up, I don't think I put her down for the entire day.
And she's attached to Mom's arms now. So far, it feels so very good. Brian Mims, WRAL News, Raleigh.
I am stunned. What a great story.
That is incredible.
What a beautiful child and beautiful family. All the best to them.
Great ending.
So great ending. So I think for us, from our perspective, I think the exciting thing about working in the field of medical devices is you can have outcomes like that, and that really makes you feel. I used to work in software, and software is exciting, but you don't get that sort of a buzz of being able to make a difference in a patient's life that you can get with medical devices, and that's one of the reasons that we're as excited as we are to be able to work in this field.
Thank you.
Do we have any questions?
I know somebody has a question for these brilliant men. Sure. How many devices you have in the product pipeline right now, and how long it's going to take to get some of those to the market?
So the number of projects we have in the pipeline sort of fluctuates depending on the number of sort of other objectives that are going on within the organization. But I would say,
the complexity of,
yeah,
of the device a lot.
yeah,
But probably at any one time, probably between 10 and 20 projects.
yeah, 10 and 20.
Probably
Yeah.
working on within our division of Cook, and Cook overall is probably maybe working on maybe 100 devices overall at any one given time.
So, and then you said how long it takes, and like I said, I think it all depends on, when we say 10 to 20 projects, some of them are on the iterative side, so we're hoping for 2 to 3 years, and then some of the more complex ones will probably take 6 to 10 years. So.
I have a question. So since we're in a community college, can you expand a little bit about the types of jobs available?
Yeah, so is my microphone's working okay now, yeah? You got to stand by the mic. I got to stand by this mic. Okay, that's fine. So, like I was saying earlier, I think there's an awful lot of different types of jobs. It's a minority of our workforce that are engineers. We obviously have lots of jobs in engineering, quality engineers, production engineers, research and development engineers. We also, half of our employees are high school graduates that have a high school diploma that are working in production. We're partnering more and more with technical colleges like SciTech to be able to develop our own people. We have a lot of opportunities for technicians as well, which is a level that would be between somebody that's working on manufacturing the products and the engineers. And then, like I said before, finance, marketing, regulatory, quality. So there's a huge variety of different types of roles. We also have roles for clinical people. We have a number of people in the company that have come from a nursing background, particularly a GI nursing, gastroenterology background. Those are the ones that come to mind. Anything you would add, Vihar?
No, I think that was pretty comprehensive. Yeah.
I have a
up
question.
Here. Go ahead, please.
Do y'all do internships?
We do. Yeah, we have a really good intern program. It's Cook-wide, and it's been running now for, God, I'm trying to think. It's been running probably for 7 or 8 years. I think across Cook, we probably have 60 or 70 interns every year. It's a 3-month program, and a lot of those interns are in engineering, but we have them in cafeteria, we have them in the fitness area, we have them in marketing. So we have a paid internship program that runs every summer.
It's a great presentation, guys. Really want to thank you. We'll thank you more formally in a second, but I have a question. Do you, sometimes I notice on the pharma industry side that if you had excess capacity, you could contract for others. Does Cook do that?
We don't. I mean, there are companies that specialize in that. There are companies that are contract manufacturers for other companies. It's not something we do. We're pretty unusual for our size, in that almost all of the products that we manufacture, we develop them ourselves. So we sort of have our own internal R&D engine, which is unusual for most larger medical device companies. They tend to buy startups out of California. So we don't get involved in contract manufacturing. Some companies do, but it tends to be primarily a specialized industry of companies that focus on contract manufacturing.
Yeah, we do outsource some manufacturing to other companies, but yeah, we don't insource anything.
Question down the back. When are we hiring? We're currently hiring. I mean, if you go to the Cook Medical website, I think currently, I'm thinking we probably have more than 20 openings at the moment. A lot of them actually, a lot of them currently in engineering, actually, quality engineering, R&D engineering. But we are continuously looking for people, and that's on the Cook Medical website. But we're looking for all sorts of people all of the time.
Any more questions?
Thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to ask Alan Murdoch, who's our Vice President of Economic Workforce and Development, to come up and officially thank you guys. And Scott, if you'd come up too, because where are you hiding? Oh yeah, there he is. Okay, great. Okay. So I'm Russ Reed. I'm the Executive Director of the National Center for the Biotechnology Workforce. And again, I want to say, guys, great. We have a great partnership with you right across the country. We just ran a large grant called a TAC grant, a U.S. Department of Labor grant, $50 million grant with 12 institutions. And one of our main partners was Ivy Tech in Bloomington, who actually sits right at your kitty corner of your main headquarters. And so we've known this relationship for a long time now, and we're very, very grateful. And so I'm going to pass it over to my boss here, Alan. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Russ, and thanks for stealing my thunder. I think Russ just did a great job. But on behalf of for SciTech and behalf of the National Center for the Bio Workforce, and a couple other thank yous, I don't know where they place. That child that you guys showed on TV, thank you. That's awesome.
And how old is that child today, John? She is 4. Because we did a video with her recently. She's
Oh, really?
4 years old now.
All right, well, fantastic. That's amazing. That is absolutely amazing. From the county perspective, thanks for those 600 plus jobs in here. If you want to bring it on a few more, we're okay with that.
We want to.
Yeah, good. I would love to have it. And especially thanks for letting Scott work with us. He's been a great asset to us. So with that, thank you very much.
We have a little token for you.
Yep.
Being an academic institution, Vihar.
Oh, thank you very
Congratulations.
much. Thank you.
That's for Barry.
Thank you very much.
And Scott. And if you guys would hold them face-wise. And Dr. Green, if you'd come up. I guess Jennifer's gone, so there we go. John, you want to come up? Anybody? Brenda, you want to come up? We'll take a picture. That's great. Congratulations. Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Can I just note Brenda Summers is here from our trade organization, from RTP, NC Bio, and she's driven up today to be with us. So thank you, Brenda. Thanks very much.
We're statewide, even though we're